I thought we were just having a quiet Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law's house. The kind of evening I had survived dozens of times before, with a polite smile and a glass of wine I didn't enjoy. I had no idea that the folded piece of paper she slid across the oak table toward me, with a smile so warm it could melt butter, contained a number she had no business knowing. My exact monthly salary down to the last dollar. And I had no idea that my husband, the man who kissed me at the door that morning and told me he loved me, had given it to her. That was the beginning of the end of the life I thought I had, and the beginning of the life I actually deserved. Let me take you back to before that Sunday dinner. Back to the version of my life that still felt solid under my feet, before I learned that the ground I was standing on had been quietly undermined for months. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old, and by almost every measure I could think of, my life was good. Not perfect. Nothing is. But genuinely, warmly good in the way that makes you feel guilty for wanting more. I had a job I was proud of, a senior project manager at a mid-size marketing firm downtown, pulling in just over $5,000 a month after taxes. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. I had earned every dollar of it through late nights, client calls that ran into dinners, and years of building a reputation that meant something. I had a small apartment that I had turned into a home, with secondhand bookshelves I had painted myself, a kitchen window where the morning light hit the copper kettle just right, and a balcony where I drank my first cup of coffee every day regardless of the season. And I had Daniel. Daniel was the kind of man who seemed, on the surface, to be exactly what you hoped for. He was thoughtful in small ways. He remembered how I took my coffee. He texted me when he arrived somewhere safely. He laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. We had been together for 3 years and married for 14 months. He worked in logistics, making roughly the same as me, and we had built what felt like a careful, balanced life. We split the rent on a 2-bedroom apartment we had moved into 6 months before our wedding. We had a joint account for shared expenses and kept our own accounts for personal spending. It was practical, and at the time I thought practical was the same as healthy. I was wrong about that too. The fault line in our marriage had a name, and that name was Brenda. Brenda was Daniel's mother. She was 62 years old, trim and well-dressed in the way that suggested she spent real money on things that were meant to suggest she didn't have to think about money. She had steel gray hair cut into a precise bob, and she wore small pearl earrings every single time I saw her, as if she had decided pearls were her brand and committed to it absolutely. She smelled of a floral perfume that was just a little too strong. Not overwhelmingly so, just enough that it lingered in any room she entered long after she had left it, like a flag she planted to mark her territory. I want to be fair to the Brenda I thought I knew in those early years. She was not openly cruel. She did not insult me to my face. She smiled at me and asked about my work and brought a casserole dish covered in foil when she came to visit. But there was always something underneath the casserole, underneath the smile, underneath the pearl earrings, and the careful pleasantries. A watching quality, an assessment, the way a person looks at something they are considering whether to keep or to move. She had been widowed 8 years before I met Daniel, and in that time Daniel had become, in ways he didn't fully understand or refuse to examine, the center of her emotional universe. He called her every other day. He drove 40 minutes to her house to fix things that a handyman could have handled. He deferred to her opinions in ways so automatic they had become invisible to him. When she said she didn't like a restaurant we had recommended, he stopped suggesting it. When she made a comment about the color we had painted the living room, "A little cold, don't you think, for a home?" he brought it up to me 3 days later as if the idea were his own. He was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that because what I'm about to tell you is easier to understand if you know that. He was not cruel or calculating. He was simply a man who had never learned to see where his mother ended and where he began. And Brenda had worked very hard to make sure that line stayed blurry. The first truly strange thing happened about 4 months before that Sunday dinner. We were in the car, driving back from a birthday party for one of Daniel's cousins, a big, noisy event at a rented hall with bad catering and too many children running underfoot. I was tired and content in the comfortable way of someone who had fulfilled a social obligation and was now heading home to pajamas and a television show. Daniel was quiet, which I didn't immediately think was unusual. He was often quiet after family events, as if he spent so much energy being present that the return trip required silence. But then he said, almost too casually, "My mom was asking about your salary again." I turned to look at him. The highway lights moved across his face in slow, even pulses. "Again?" I said. "When did she ask the first time?" He shifted in his seat, a small adjustment that I had learned, without realizing I had learned it, meant discomfort. "At Christmas, remember? She asked what your bonus looked like." I did remember. I had deflected it at the time, laughed and said bonuses were always unpredictable, and filed it away as one of those slightly invasive questions that mothers-in-law sometimes asked. Boundary testing, curiosity without malice. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "Nothing specific," he said. "Just that you were doing well." I nodded and let it go. I should not have let it go. Over the following weeks, I began to notice other small things, each one insignificant in isolation, each one only revealing its shape in retrospect. Brenda started calling during dinner, not just occasionally, regularly at that specific hour, as if she had identified the time Daniel was most likely to answer and I was most likely to be distracted. Their conversations would move to the hallway, voices dropping just low enough that I couldn't quite make out words, just the rhythm of an ongoing discussion about something I wasn't part of. When Daniel came back to the table, he was sometimes preoccupied in a way he couldn't explain. "Just family stuff," he would say, and pick up his fork like the subject was closed. Brenda also started asking about our apartment with a new specificity. Was the landlord flexible? Had we thought about buying? Did we know what properties were going for in our neighborhood? I answered these questions with the same deflecting friendliness I had always used with her, but something was shifting inside me, a quiet unease I couldn't quite name. It felt like being watched by someone who wasn't in the room. And then there was the incident with the financial advisor. It was a Tuesday evening in early March. I had come home from work later than usual. A client presentation had run long, and found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a yellow legal pad covered in handwritten notes beside him. He startled when I came in. Just slightly. Just a half-second's worth of guilty adjustment, but I saw it. He closed the laptop before I could see the screen. "Hey," he said, "how was the presentation?" "Good," I said, setting down my bag and looking at him. "What are you working on?" "Just some budget stuff," he said, "trying to get a clearer picture of where we are." I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, reading his face the way you read the face of someone you have lived with long enough to know all their small tells. His jaw was set in that way it got when he was holding something back. His eyes met mine and then moved to the window. "Budget stuff," I repeated. "Yeah," he said. "My mom was suggesting we talk to someone, a financial planner, to make sure we're being smart about the future." Something cold moved through me, quick and precise as a draft from a window I hadn't known was open. "Your mom suggested we talk to a financial planner," I said slowly. "She just wants us to be secure," he said. "She knows someone who does it. Helped her after my dad died." I made myself breathe evenly. I made myself smile, the polite, thin smile that I had gotten very good at over the years of knowing Brenda. "That's kind of her," I said, "but we're managing fine. We don't need someone your mother knows poking around in our finances." He didn't push it that night, but the laptop was there, and the legal pad was there, and the numbers written on it in his familiar handwriting, numbers I recognized as close approximations of our monthly expenses and our salaries. Those were there too, and I thought, standing in my kitchen in my work clothes, that I was going to have to pay much closer attention. The Sunday dinner that changed everything came on a warm day in late April, the kind of day that makes you feel like the world is fundamentally benevolent, golden light through new leaves, the smell of cut grass somewhere nearby, a breeze that felt like a gift. I remember thinking, as Daniel and I drove to Brenda's house, that I was going to be better at this, more relaxed, less guarded. She was his mother. She meant well. I was being unfair. I remember exactly what I was wearing: a pale blue dress with small white buttons down the front and sandals I had bought the previous summer. I had brought a bottle of wine and a box of butter cookies from a bakery I liked. I remember the way the light came through the windshield as we parked, warm and yellow and full of false promise. Brenda's house was a pale yellow colonial in a quiet suburb, the kind of house that announced respectability and good taste without ostentation. The garden was meticulous. She spent hours in it, and it showed. There were hanging baskets on the front porch, and the door had a wreath of dried lavender on it that she had made herself. Inside, the house smelled of pot roast and something sweetly floral underneath. The same perfume she always wore settled into the upholstery and the curtains and the air itself. Brenda's sister, Renata, was also there. I hadn't expected her. Renata was 3 years younger than Brenda, sharper-faced, with narrow eyes that assessed everything she looked at with the same quiet precision as her sister. She kissed me on both cheeks when I came in and said it was so good to see me, and I felt the assessment happening behind the warmth of it, felt myself being evaluated by 2 pairs of eyes instead of 1. Dinner was pleasant on the surface. The pot roast was good. Daniel was relaxed and talkative, more at ease in his mother's house than he ever quite seemed in our apartment. And I watched this and felt the small, familiar ache of it. Renata asked about my work with what seemed like genuine interest, and I answered her questions about project management and client relationships, and she nodded and said things like, "That sounds so demanding," and "You must be exhausted sometimes." And there was something in the way she said it. Not sympathy exactly, but a cataloging, a noting down. It was after dessert, a lemon cake that Brenda had made from a recipe she told me had been in her family for 3 generations, when Brenda reached to the sideboard behind her chair and picked up a notepad. It was a small, spiral-bound notepad, the kind you could buy in any drugstore, and she set it in front of her with a deliberateness that made the air in the room change. Daniel was refilling wine glasses. Renata was folding her napkin, and Brenda slid the notepad across the table toward me with both hands, the way you push a gift, and smiled. I looked down at it. On the top page, in Brenda's neat, looping handwriting, there were 3 lines. The first line was a number, $5,200. My monthly take-home salary, accurate to within $50. The second line said, household expenses, shared. The third line said, remaining shortfall per month. and the shortfall listed was $1,500. I picked up the notepad. My fingers felt strange, numb at the tips, clumsy. I read the 3 lines again. I looked up at Brenda. Her smile hadn't moved. It was warm and expectant, the smile of someone presenting a solution to a problem everyone had already agreed existed. "Daniel and I have been talking," she said, in the voice she used for announcements she had decided were reasonable before she made them. "And we've realized that with the cost of living the way it is, and with you both wanting to start a family someday, $5,000 a month just isn't going to be enough for the 2 of you going forward. It's not a criticism, sweetheart. It's just math." I heard the words. I processed the words. But what happened underneath the processing was something physical. A tightening in my chest, a distant ringing that might have been rage or shock or both, a sensation of the room tilting very slightly, the way a floor tilts when the foundation beneath it shifts. I turned my head and looked at Daniel. He was standing at the side of the table with the wine bottle in his hand, and he was looking at the table, not at me, at the table. His jaw was that particular set it got. His eyes were doing that thing where they found somewhere safe to rest that wasn't my face. "Daniel," I said. My voice was very quiet. Even I was surprised by how quiet it was. "Did you give her my salary?" The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. "Honey," he said, "it's just a conversation." "Did you give her my salary?" I said again. Not a question. "Not anymore." Brenda reached across the table and touched my hand with her cool, dry fingertips. "We're family," she said. "There are no secrets in family. We just want to make sure you're both set up for success. Now," she tapped the notepad with one manicured nail, "Daniel and I have worked out that if you contributed your full salary to the joint household account and Daniel managed the investments and the larger expenses, you would be in a much more secure position." I stared at her. I stared at the notepad. I stared at the number that was my salary written in her handwriting, on her notepad, in her dining room after a dinner I had brought wine to. And I thought, with the strange clarity that comes right before everything breaks, she's been planning this for a very long time. "I need some air," I said, and stood up. The garden was dark and smelled of damp earth and something blooming I couldn't identify. I stood on the back patio with my arms crossed over my chest and breathed. The kitchen window threw a rectangle of yellow light onto the lawn. Inside, I could see the shapes of Daniel and his mother, heads bent together, the low murmur of their voices reaching me as indistinct sound, too soft to hear, too familiar in their rhythm to misread. They were talking without me, about my money, and something inside me, the part that had been telling me for months that I was being paranoid, that I was being unkind, that Brenda meant well and Daniel was a good man and I should be more generous. That part went very, very quiet. I took out my phone. I opened the calculator. I did the math that Brenda had laid out on that notepad, and what I found there was not a financial plan. It was a transfer. Full salary into a joint account, managed by Daniel, which meant managed by the 2 of them, while the supposed shortfall she had identified would be covered by Daniel's salary, which she had conspicuously not written on the notepad. Not because she had forgotten it, because it was not part of the equation she wanted me to see. I went back inside. Brenda and Daniel stopped talking when I appeared in the doorway. Renata was clearing dessert plates with the busy, deliberate energy of a person performing neutrality. Daniel looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, somewhere between apology and warning, as if he were trying to tell me something without being seen to tell me something. but it was too late for coded messages. It was too late for the hallway calls and the closed laptops and the careful management of what I was allowed to know. "I'd like to understand the full plan," I said, sitting back down at the table. I folded my hands in front of me. My voice was even. I was proud of how even it was. Not just the first page, all of it. Brenda and Renata exchanged a look. Fast, a flicker, a half second. But I caught it. The look of two people who have rehearsed something and are now watching the performance begin. Brenda reached for the notepad and flipped to the second page. What she showed me over the next 40 minutes was this: a plan that was detailed, specific, organized in the way that only comes from having thought about something for a very long time. My full salary, pooled into a joint account. Daniel to manage investments and major decisions. They had already spoken. She used "we" with a naturalness that told me this language was not new. To the financial advisor. They had identified our apartment lease as unnecessarily expensive and suggested we move into the spare rooms in Brenda's house until we were more stable. The money saved on rent would go into a fund that Brenda, as someone with experience managing a household budget, would help oversee. I listened to all of it without interrupting. I watched Brenda's hands moving across the notepad, her nail tapping each line as she explained it. I watched Daniel. He did not meet my eyes once in 40 minutes. He said 3 times, in slightly different arrangements of the same words, that it was just an idea, that nothing was decided, that he just wanted everyone to talk openly. He said once quietly, in the tone of someone who believes they are being reasonable, "She has more experience with this kind of thing than we do, honestly." That was the sentence that stayed with me. Not her plan. Her plan was a map to my own disappearance, and I had already decided what I thought of it. But that sentence, said by a man who had been married to me for 14 months, about my money, in his mother's dining room. We drove home in near silence. The city moved past the windows, lit storefronts, traffic, the ordinary world proceeding exactly as it always did. I pressed my fingers into my thighs to feel the pressure of my own hands, to stay present, to not say anything yet. "She means well," Daniel offered somewhere on the freeway. "She genuinely does. She's just trying to—" "She wrote down my salary," I said, "which means you told her my salary, which means at some point you sat with your mother and discussed my income, and you agreed with enough of whatever she was planning that it ended up on a notepad." Silence. "When?" I asked. "How long has this been going on?" He said nothing. We stopped at a red light, and in the red light I looked at his profile. The jaw, the set of it, the deliberate focus on the road ahead. And I understood something I had been refusing to understand for months. This had not happened to him. He had participated in it. That night I lay on my side of the mattress and stared at the ceiling and made a list in my head. In the morning I called my friend Petra. Petra had known me since college. She was a paralegal, practical and precise, the kind of person who responds to a crisis by immediately identifying what can be done rather than how bad it feels. I told her everything over coffee at her kitchen table. The notepad, the salary, the plan, the financial advisor, the spare rooms in Brenda's house. And she listened without interrupting, which was itself a kind of mercy. When I finished, she set down her mug and said, "Pull up your joint account statements, right now. On your phone." I did. And what I found there, sitting at Petra's kitchen table, with morning light coming through her window and the smell of her coffee going cold between us, is what broke open the floor beneath everything I thought I knew. There were 12 transfers I had not made, small ones, most of them. $200, $300, once $450. Spaced out over 6 months with the careful irregularity of someone who understood that patterns get noticed. The recipient account was not a household vendor. It was not a utility or a subscription or anything I recognized. It was a personal account. And when I called the bank from Petra's bathroom, hands shaking so badly I had to hold the phone with both of them, I learned that the account belonged to Brenda. She had not asked Daniel to share my salary. She had already been taking it. The dizziness hit me like a physical thing. A wave of heat from the stomach up, the kind of nausea that has nothing to do with food. I sat on the edge of Petra's bathtub and pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose until the room stopped moving. 12 transfers, over $3,000. From the account I used to pay our shared electric bill and grocery runs, moved to his mother's account. And Daniel who managed the shared account, who set up the automatic payments, who was the one who noticed when we were running low, had known. He had to have known. Or worse, he had done it himself. Petra drove me to the bank that afternoon. The branch manager, a careful, soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Okafor, pulled up our account history on a wide monitor and walked me through each transaction with the measured calm of someone who had sat across from shocked people before. The transfers had begun 4 days after Brenda first mentioned the financial plan to Daniel. The timing was not a coincidence. The account they went to had been opened, Mrs. Okafor confirmed after some quiet keystrokes, jointly, with a secondary authorized user listed as Daniel Mark Holloway, my husband. He hadn't just told his mother my salary, he had given her access to our money. I drove home. I sat in the parking garage under our building for 11 minutes. I watched the concrete pillar in front of me and I breathed. I thought about the morning he had kissed me goodbye and told me he loved me, and I thought about the transfers dated that same week, and I thought about the word family coming out of Brenda's mouth, smooth and warm as something polished, and I felt something shift inside me that I recognized in some distant, almost academic way as the last of my willingness to keep the peace. It was not anger, exactly. It was colder than anger. Anger is hot and disorganized and gets you nowhere. What I felt was something that had been warm once. Trust, love, the particular tenderness of believing someone was on your side, and had cooled into something structural, a frame, a foundation, something I could build on. Daniel came home at 6:15. I put my phone on the table between us. On the screen was a screenshot of the bank statement, the 12 transfers highlighted in a column of red. He looked at it for a long moment. His face did something complicated. A flicker of calculation followed by something that might have been shame, followed by the careful arrangement of a man who has decided to try a particular approach. "Claire, don't," I said. "Don't tell me it's complicated. Don't tell me you were going to explain. Tell me the truth. Did you authorize those transfers?" The silence lasted longer than 4 seconds this time, long enough that the refrigerator cycled on and off in the kitchen, long enough that a siren passed somewhere outside and faded. "She was going to lose her house," he said finally. His voice was very quiet. "She didn't tell me until January. The mortgage, after Dad died, she restructured it, and she's been behind for 2 years. I couldn't let her. You took money from our account," I said, "without telling me, to give to your mother, for over 6 months. I was going to pay it back. I have a plan." "You had a plan," I said. "The plan was on a notepad at her dining table. The plan was to hand over my salary so the transfers could get bigger and you wouldn't have to hide them anymore." His face crumpled. It was the first honest thing I had seen from him in months. That crumpling, The specific collapse of a man who has been holding something up for too long and has just been told he can put it down. But it was too late for his honesty to be a gift to me. It was only information. "I'm sorry," he said. "I am so sorry. I didn't know how to—" "You didn't know how to tell me your mother was in financial trouble," I said. "So instead, you made me financially complicit without my knowledge or consent. And then you sat in her dining room while she presented a plan to make it permanent, and you did not say a single word in my defense." He had no answer for that. He put his face in his hands, and I sat across the table from him, and I did not feel tenderness, and I did not feel rage, and I did not feel grief. I felt finished. Quietly, completely, irreversibly finished. I called a lawyer the following morning. Her name was Margaret Chen, calm and methodical, and she had clearly heard worse. Nothing I told her changed the expression on her face. She explained what I could prove and what the timeline looked like, and at the end of the meeting she said, "You've been lucky, in one sense. You kept your own account separate from the joint account. Your savings are protected." "She doesn't know about my savings account," I said. Margaret looked at me steadily. "Let's keep it that way." What followed were the hardest 3 weeks of my adult life, and also, in a way I didn't fully understand until later, the most clarifying. I spoke to Daniel twice more. Once to establish that he would be moving to his sister's apartment while things were sorted, and once in a formal sit-down where his participation in the transfers was documented on the record. He did not fight it. He sat across the table from me and from Margaret and confirmed every date, every amount, every phone call from his mother that had preceded each transfer. He looked throughout like a man watching a structure collapse that he himself had built on sand and could not quite believe was falling. Brenda was a different matter. Brenda did not take the formal letter from Margaret's office gracefully. She went on the offensive, called Daniel, called Renata, called 2 of Daniel's cousins to report that I was destroying the family over a misunderstanding about shared expenses. She sent me a text message that read in its entirety, "I only wanted what was best for my son. You never deserved him." I screenshot it and sent it to Margaret without comment. It became part of the file. The formal demand for restitution of the $3,400 went out by registered mail. Brenda's response, through her own hastily hired attorney, was that the transfers had been agreed upon verbally. She did not have documentation to that effect because no such agreement had been made. But the claim bought her 6 weeks and cost both of us money in legal fees. What settled it, in the end, was Daniel. Whatever failures he had committed in the months before, he did not lie on paper. He provided a written statement confirming that I had never agreed to the transfers, that he had authorized them without my knowledge, and that his mother had been fully aware they were made without my consent. It was the most honest thing he had done in our marriage, and it came 18 months too late, and it cost me $6,000 in legal fees to receive it. But I received it. Brenda repaid the money in 2 installments. She did not apologize. I did not expect her to. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. I want to tell you what my kitchen smells like now. It smells like the coffee I make for myself every morning in the copper kettle I kept in the settlement. I was very specific about the kettle. And it smells like the lemon soap I buy from a small shop 2 blocks away. And sometimes in the evenings, like whatever I am cooking, which I do slowly now, with music on, without a timetable anyone else controls. I moved into a smaller apartment, mine, only mine, with a lease only in my name. And I repainted the living room a color I chose entirely by myself, a deep, warm terracotta that no one has called cold. My savings account has a number in it that I worked for and planned for, and that no one will ever move without my signature. My name is the only one on it. I think about Brenda sometimes, not with anger. That burned itself clean a long time ago. But with a kind of careful study, the way you study something that nearly caught you. She is a woman who mistook control for love so thoroughly that she couldn't see the difference, and she raised a son in that image, and in the end it cost her both of them. Daniel and I do not speak. I heard through Petra that he has moved back into his mother's spare room, and I hope, genuinely, that at some point he finds his way out of it. The morning light still comes through my kitchen window at the same angle it always did. I sit with my coffee and I watch it move across the floor, and I think about the woman who sat in that dining room with a notepad in front of her and a number that was her salary written in someone else's handwriting, and I think, she got out. She did what needed to be done. She lost things she thought she couldn't survive losing, and she was wrong about that, in the best possible way. You cannot build a life on a foundation that belongs to someone else. I know that now in my bones, in the copper kettle, in the color of my walls. Some lessons cost too much, but once you have paid for them, they are yours forever, and nobody can ever take them back.